Science and Society. Okay, I think recording just started, so I'll just start again. So welcome to the first talk in the Science and Society series. On behalf of the group that organized it, I'll just say a little bit about the series as a whole before introducing today's speaker and handing over to him. The idea behind organizing this series came about last month when Mahavir Narwal passed away of COVID on the 8th of May. For those who are not familiar with him, Mahavir Narwal was a scientist based in Rohtak in Haryana, but he was also a kind and empathetic human being who was committed to social justice and embodied the image of the scientist whose vision stretched beyond the lab into a concern for society, for politics, and for a hopeful future for humankind. So it is to him that this series is dedicated. The series brings together a group of eminent scholars who share a progressive vision of the relation of science to society. It is a vision which sees, as Ambedkar and Periyar did, a role of a scientific and rationalist temper in challenging socially oppressive hierarchies which treat social inequality as natural or inherent. It is also a vision that sees the importance of an ethical role of science and the ethical engagement of the scientific community in questioning many of the ways that our society is structured, for instance, in terms of access to education or healthcare. And finally, it envisions science for the many and not just for the few. So many of the talks in the series will deal with questions which the people science movements raised from the 1980s onwards. For instance, of how to make science accessible to the people in regional languages, and also of how to place science at the service of the powerless in society, often against powerful, large companies, pharmaceutical or seed corporations, or polluting industries. And just two examples of the last of these are, of course, the catastrophic gas leak in Bhopal in 1984, which affected more than 500,000 people, or for instance, the aerial spraying of endosulfan pesticides in Kerala, both of which polluted environments, poisoned livelihoods, and in some cases caused hereditary physical disabilities. And the ongoing pandemic has showed us where the lack of a scientific temper has brought us, both at the level of government response as well as at a popular level. We have only to think of the last year for examples of this, of Thali Bajao and Diya Jalao campaigns, or rumors that chants or even cow dung cures COVID, or Baba Ramdev's statements against the COVID vaccine. And this is just a few among the many very obscure and obscurantist ideas out there today. So that's the kind of wider idea behind these talks. And now more specifically, the series of talks and discussions over the next 5 weeks are intended to be informal evening discussions around many of these themes, and will take place every Monday at this time, so at 6:30, and can go on either till 8 p.m. or as long as the speaker and audience have the energy to go on. And in the spirit of this informality, I request those who can put on their cameras to please do so, and those who would like to ask questions or have comments at the end to maybe unmute and ask your question verbally if you're comfortable with that. And now I'll just quickly introduce today's speaker, R. Ramanujam. Ramanujam is a professor of theoretical computer science at the Institute of Mathematical Sciences in Chennai. He has also been deeply committed to the popularization of science as part of the Tamil Nadu Science Forum, or TNSF. He has been associated for over 30 years with the monthly Tamil magazine Thulir, which took science to school children. In the 1990s, he was involved in developing slideshows with which he and TNSF went to street corners to screen them using dhotis as screens. And one of these slideshows was based on Carl Sagan's Cosmos, and others were on topics ranging from health to peace to nuclear weapons. With TNSF, he also started the Children's Science Congress And he was awarded the Indira Gandhi Prize for the popularization of science last year on behalf of the Tamil Nadu Science Forum. And with TNSF, he is currently involved, I believe, with training COVID volunteers. So today he'll be speaking on the subject science education, whose science and for whom. So with that, I'll hand over to Professor Ramanujam.
Thank you. Thank you, Naina. It's a pleasure for me to be in this conversation. Yeah, I mean, Naina spoke so much about People's Science Movement, and I've been associated with that, and almost everything that I have learned, or what I can say about science communication, science education, is mainly what I have learned from the People's Science Movement. So rather than talk on the People's Science Movement itself, I thought I'll concentrate on science communication, science education, and through this talk about certain perspectives from the PSM. So thank you all. And like Naina said, I mean, please feel free to interrupt. There is no syllabus for us to cover. So I just want to share some ideas, and we don't have to go over everything that's there in the slides. It's meant to be a discussion, so please talk whenever you can. Okay, so here is, I hope my slides move. So I'll be using TNSF to refer to Tamil Nadu Science Forum. This is a group that part of the science movement that I've been associated with for a long time. And so let me start with an incident. So this is sometime in the early 90s, probably 91 or 92, I don't remember. And TNSF organizes these programs which are called Meet the Scientist. Okay, so it's basically interaction for scientists and children, especially in rural areas. You go somewhere, meet children, talk to them. That is it. So this one was in a village near Arupukote. And what really I used to do in those days was to land, if I was spending some time in the village, land sometime in the evening, and night, take a telescope, do a night sky show, interact with children, spend the night in the village, and leave early morning for whatever next thing I had to do. So this is what I was doing. So in the evening I landed, and a whole bunch of children took me around and to show me various things around the village. And my guide-in-chief was a girl called Kuruamma, and 12 years old. And she was, while we were, there were like several children, but she was the one who was most articulate, was talking to me. She was talking about showing me trees, plants, medicinal herbs, ada toda, this and that. She would pluck it and make me smell it, show me things, talking about birds, insects. And she had plenty to say. And I kept on saying, I don't know this, and I don't know this. And she was, amazed at my claimed ignorance. Remember, I'm the scientist, and I'm there to meet the children. Right?
Jam, sorry to interrupt. Could you just speak a little louder? The voice is a little.
The audio is.
That was good.
Okay, I'll maybe if I remove the earphones and try. How about this? Is it better?
Okay. No, it's fainter now.
It's fainter.
Yeah.
Maybe I should come closer. Yeah, I'll try to come closer. Is it better now?
Yeah, maybe just a little louder might help.
Okay, maybe or I can sit down and I prefer to stand, but then I can be closer.
I'm just wondering
what about now?
It's on the earphones itself.
Yeah, I think this is better.
This is fine. I'm okay with it.
Is it okay?
Yeah. I don't know. Does anyone have any suggestions about making it louder?
Jam, you have to hold the mic near your mouth and speak. That's the only way, I think.
Hold it like this.
Yeah.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
Yes, very much.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about this.
Actually, you can loop it a few times around your glasses, and then you don't need to hold it up.
I don't know. I'll just hold it. Yeah. Let's see. I hope it will. Yeah. Okay. So let's get back to Kuruvamma, and yeah. So she was, showing me how they make molasses around there, talking about its properties. And then we were doing, when we were watching night sky, the night sky, she could show me constellations. She knew names of some of them. There are many Tamil names, and she knew some of them. And next morning, when I left, of course, all the children came to say bye to me. And then I said, hey, Kuruma, you're going to make a great scientist someday. And then all the children laughed. Sir, I never get more than 30 marks in science. So here is my question to you. So let's wave a magic wand. And at that moment, what do you think is the probability that Kuruvamma would make a scientist? Enter the portals of, say, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, or one of the IITs, or Tata Institute, Fundamental Research, or Priya, or I don't know where. What do you think is the probability? What numbers would you like to give? I would like to hear some responses, if I may.
A suggestion. Can we, I'm not sure if you intended this, but can we separate the probability of her becoming a scientist from the probability of her getting into IISc?
Okay. Now, I was just saying it, but you can separate it. I have no problem. I would still like to get a number.
Jam, it would be 50% even to join a normal arts and science college.
I see. Okay. Anybody else?
If we had got a good teacher in class 11 or 12, then the probability becomes 80%.
I see. Okay. Thanks, Uttara. Yeah. Anyone else?
I would say less than 5%.
Less than 5%. Okay. Yeah. I see some things on chat. No. Random, somebody says, less than 1%. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. So let's move on. I'll come back to this later. Here is a question for, of course, this is a classroom, right? After all. So what's the boiling point of water? You enter a classroom and you ask, you get a nice chorus, 100 degrees. And 100 degrees, 100 degrees Celsius. Okay. And then say, sure, 100 degrees Celsius. Somebody will say, oh, atmospheric pressure and blah, 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 etc. Then you ask, how do you know? Well, how do you know? Well, because the book told me so. And typically I ask, how many people have actually, have you done the experiment? How many people have done the experiment? Ask for a show of hands. Once in a while, somebody puts up their hand and, then I say, what thermometer you need? And then you realize that, okay, clinical thermometer is not going to do. You need a lab thermometer, whatever. And then I say, look, I've done this many times, but I never get 100. I get all kinds of numbers, but I don't get 100 degrees when I do the experiment. And I've done it with groups, and I've done it in workshops. Many, thanks to Science Forum, I've done this many, many times. But I never get 100. So what does it mean? And why is it that I never get 72? I do get 101, I get 98, I get this, but I don't get 72. I don't. So how do you understand this? More importantly, okay, what about this? Which water? Well water, tap water, river water, What about the boiling point of water from the Bay of Bengal? You know, this discussion, when it happens in a classroom with children, evokes various kinds of responses, really. And all kinds of, it's very noisy, fun, but all sorts of things are being said. But my point is that, you want to talk about an experiment, how many people actually do it, and what does it mean when you get data from your experiment? That's not what the book says. The book says water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, but when you do it, you get something else. Now, I would like to suggest that it is in this negotiation. You say, oh, there is parallax. Why is it that she's getting this? Why am I getting that? And then you say, oh, maybe the problem is with the thermometer. Problem is with the calibration, probably, and you start saying, and then, oh, maybe it is the water is wrong. And then people will say distilled water boils. I mean, that there is so much science happening there. And I would like to suggest that the science actually happens in that discussion and that negotiation. I call it negotiation. And unfortunately, the factoid of water boils at 100 degrees Celsius completely misses all this about science. Here is another another interaction. And, something that you always ask children, what do you want to become when when you're an adult? And children say, and invariably, Tamil Nadu in the 90s, when I used to ask, children would say, I want to become a police officer, all sorts of things. But very rarely do you hear somebody say, I want to become a scientist. And there was one child who said he wanted to become a scientist when he grew up. And question was, okay, why? And so I talked more. And then he said, he wanted to, what do you want to do, as a scientist? And he said he wanted to design an idli machine. And then talking further, it turned out that his mother, a single parent, raising a family, she was sitting, you in Tamil Nadu, you go to any of the small towns, you get off the bus, in the bus stand, there will be some women selling idlis. She's one of them. And, and this boy has been watching this happening, and then he wanted to make it easier. Now I have a question for you. Let's again wave a magic wand. Let us get him admission into IIT Madras, Mechanical Engineering Department. Now, what are the chances that he would be able to do so, and whether he will do so? I would like you to think about it. I'm not entirely sure that the technology education that we have actually enables you to design one or build one. That's something to think about. Whether you will want to, the kind of technology education you get, after that, would you want to design one? Would you want to make such machines? That's another question. So there's a lot going on here. I mean, technology, the attitude to technology in science education is something I would like you to seriously think about, because technology is never engaged with in the classroom. It's never constructed. Technology is something that is given and consumed. And our entire mode of education, how it looks at technology. And these are all things for us to ponder. So how does our education system relate to technology in general? And here, the new education policy, National Education Policy 2020 is, there is a lot about technology and education. There's a whole chapter on it. But when they say technology, they mean ICT. They're not talking about idli machines. And they're not talking about ICT except to use it in the classroom. They're not talking about attitude to technology and building technology and the relationship between science and technology. Now, okay, why am I saying these things? We'll get to it. The major problem for me is the silence in classrooms. Children rarely talk science. Nobody is talking about when they hear a piece of information like, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Nobody is asking, is it tap water or well water or whatever, right? We don't talk such things in the classroom. I mean, I don't know about your, Kriya classrooms. I don't know if it happens, but in general, I do not see science classrooms where that kind of engagement happens. And certainly not children. And children rarely talk science in the classroom. And I think these are two very important things. One is not talking science, and another is not talking science in the classroom. And so that classroom as a space for coming and talking science. Children do not get many opportunities to do science. To do science meaning, well, what is doing science about? Making hypotheses, performing experiments, collecting data. And there is something absurd about experiments in the school. The so-called lab work, because you have these records, and those records are really beautiful, written in beautiful handwriting. In Tamil we say mani maniya, mutta mutta. But that's what you would find. But if you look at the data logs of scientists, they are messy. I mean, with sambar fallen on it, but it's real data. That's the difference. I mean, in the school in Trichy that I went to, I got to see the teacher perform experiments. I never did any. And I never thought of myself as learning science meant doing experiments. And in my undergraduate studies in Pilani, I quickly learned that you go for a lab, 3-hour lab. The entire 3 hours is to make sure that you get a certain graph, right? Initially, you think you must get certain data. Later, you realize that the shape of the graph matters more. But the entire effort is to reproduce what you think you should get. That's all. There's no question of finding out something that you didn't know through experiment, right? And then children do not get opportunities to do science and outside the classroom, especially at home. And rural children, especially girls, can rarely see themselves as scientists. And all these propositions have, relate to what we were talking about. Yeah, there was I want to describe a lesson in science communication that for me, basically, this was one of the very early days of my involvement in the science movement. I had done almost no science communication before. I'd heard that in Pondicherry, there was this person called Sundaraman who was going around with a telescope and showing the night sky. So there was this friend of mine, Venkateshwaran. We too decided we should also do such things. And we knew a teacher in Changalpattu and in a village in the district. And so we, same thing, went with a 6-inch telescope and do a night sky session. The plan was to show Jupiter. And seeing Jupiter through a telescope is a wonderful experience, and that's what we wanted to do. Well, the attempt was a big failure. Now, I would like to ask somebody, why do you think it was a big failure? Anyone?
There might have been clouds.
Exactly. That is the thing. No, it was not a cloudy night. Beautiful, clear sky. Anything else?
It was the wrong season. Jupiter had not risen.
No. I mean, you could see Jupiter. I mean, we knew that, and that's why we wanted to show. So.
Was it because nobody came because it was the night time?
Wonderful. Yeah. Okay. So no, that was, and that's really what I usually hear. The problem was too many came, right? In a village, you sit and put up a telescope. Who comes? Children, right? Children always show up, and children showed up. And lots of children milling all about us. And we have the tripod, you have set up this thing. And how big do you think Jupiter looks when you look through a telescope and see? Some tiny little thing. Now you're focused on all this, and one child comes and looks through, and while one child is doing that, another is climbing on your back and shouting, saying, hey, me, and so on. And alignment is all gone. And by the time you set it all up for the next one, somebody else is screaming, it is a disaster. And there were 50 children milling about, and we couldn't manage the children. We couldn't do anything. And the teacher was, day, and all. He was threatening all over, and we were saying, telling him, no, please don't do that. And so it was chaos. And then some genius angel whispered in our ears, saying that we were being stupid. I mean, what? Yeah, exactly. It's not exciting. Oh, there is Kishore, of course, he knows. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So then what we realized was there is a half moon hanging in the sky. Now, I mean, anybody who has watched anything through a telescope knows that, you know, half moon is wonderful to watch, right? And there was half moon. So, and what's the great joy of the moon? No focusing is needed, nothing, you say. And then something happened. And that was a lesson that I have never forgotten. The children ran all through the village shouting, Amma, nela katranga, nela katranga, nela katranga. And then the women came because they wanted to see the moon. Who cares about Jupiter? Huh? Yeah, I mean, this is something of a stupid thing if you think about it. Whereas the moon, you know, it's a deeply cultured thing. Every baby is shown the moon when the baby is being fed. So the women came in large numbers. So there were children milling about. There were women, almost all of them neoliterate women, you know, mostly agricultural laborers. They were sitting there, and it transformed the program completely. And you know, we started at, I don't know, 8 p.m. or something like that, and we were going on till midnight, and there were discussions. We were talking about nebulae, we were talking about birth of a star. There were all sorts of things, and people were asking questions. So why am I saying that? I mean, if we think of science communication as something that, you know, here is some science that I want to take to the masses, right? It's completely stupid. I mean, apart from stupid in many other ways, it's not going to work either. On the other hand, when we look at it from the people's idiom, from the people's thought, then it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, so I mean, I can say more on this, but I just wanted to say that, you know, these experiences, after that, there have been many. I know people in the audience who have done much more than I have on these things, but again and again, you know, during the International Year of Astronomy, when we did large number of night sky sessions with neoliterates, the transit of Venus, ISON, and so on. You know, and one great thing about rural areas and urban areas is that the rural areas are rich in the night sky, right? I mean, there's no comparison at all. And I always make a point to tell that to children, that you have the night sky. And this is not the school. There is no examinations, there's nothing. So, you know, and then people are, the sky holds endless fascination for people. And when science communication goes through astronomy to look at the world through people's eyes, in the people's language, you know, it takes a very different form. And this is something I think the people science movement really taught us. Certainly for me, it was perhaps it has been one of the most important learning experiences, to look at science through how people, especially the neoliterates, think. Now, here is one that I mean, I'm not, you're going to have a long discussion on the pandemic and the public engagement with the pandemic. Now, Tamil Nadu government is distributing Kabasura Kudineer to all COVID positive patients. We have, I think, 3 or 4 packets of Kabasura Kudineer at home now. And now I was having an interaction in a city college a few months ago, and I asked, not that it was context was different, but I still asked, and I asked, is Kabasura Kudineer a cure for COVID-19? And there was something like, you know, close to 200 students on Zoom. The session was going on, lots of remarks, lots of response. And I found that almost everyone had a vehement yes or a vehement no.
Excuse me, what is this Kabasura Kudineer?
Well, it's a concoction of herbs. Okay. And the discussion was largely on an emotional play. Almost everyone who said yes predominantly was talking about traditional herbs and their effectiveness, etc., etc. And those who said no were saying that no, this is not. Problem was, whatever happened to evidence-based reasoning? And that's something that I found missing in the discussion. And that's a point I want to make. And this is something that you see in almost all discussions you can have with the public. Now, science as a compulsory subject in school, it started with the 1968 National Policy on Education. It's not that long ago. Science was not a compulsory subject in school. until the 1968 policy. So it was only in 1971, 72 that it really made it to all schools as a compulsory subject. And the 86 policy on education says all areas of why is it science education important? Because all areas of development are science and technology based, and for that we need experts, middle order workers, and scientifically literate citizens. So it sees science as science education as instrumental in providing manpower development, if that is the term that they talk about. And it specifies how the curriculum should be designed. It talks about conscious internalization of healthy work ethos. This will provide valuable manpower for economic growth, as well as for ideal citizenship to live effectively in an S&T-based society. The National Curriculum Framework 2005 sounds very different. It talks about the scientific temper. It says science education should enable the learner to acquire the skills and understand the methods and processes that lead to generation and validation of scientific knowledge. And the entire emphasis on processes, experimentation, making observations, collection of data, all these. And then the NEP 2020 speaks of critical thinking as a goal of science education, but adds, little further to actually lend weightage to what it says. There's not much of a discussion on it as yet. Now, there is a huge gap between the perceived goals of science education and what actually takes place in the science classroom. How does the current prevalent curriculum and pedagogy generate manpower for economic growth in an S&T-based society, like 1986 policy wanted? How does it create the scientific temper in children, like 2005 policy talked about? Now, does Kuruma have any hope of joining these experts, middle order workers, and scientifically literate citizens that the vision calls necessary? Or can Kuruma expect to understand the process of science and internalize them like the National Curriculum Framework wants? Now, quality education as a right is a very recent concept for our society. Let's not forget that. Now, we expect that the state guarantees the right to education for every child. Now, we expect a uniform curriculum and pedagogy. Question is, what about the conviction that universal education is an instrument for social equity? Does science education act as an instrument of social equity? And in India, science education is part of another agenda. The advent of mass education and Western models of science education in this country was accompanied by an Enlightenment mood. The understanding of science as a means of liberation from casteist and religious domination of social practices. Science in the annihilation of caste. That is what we should be thinking of. Science as an important weapon in the battle against forces of obscurantism and superstition. You read writings from Zakir Hussain Committee onwards, from 1930s, 40s, and 50s. There is this vision that you come across again and again. Science education as an essential component of modernization and social transformation. Well, science education merely reflects inequity. In terms of academic performance, which is the passport to economic upliftment, Kuruma has no hope of becoming a scientist. In terms of processes that encourage critical thought, that lead Kuruma towards freedom from fear and prejudice, school science seems to be of no help whatsoever. And there are major systemic issues. Kuruma's identity as a rural Dalit girl. She's a first-generation learner. There are no books, no gadgets at home. Her school has no library nor laboratory. The idioms of modern urban science learning are alien to Kuruma. There are no planetaria, there is no science city, there is no internet. The state-supplied textbook is her sole link to modern formal science. Experiments, as I said, are at best seen from a distance once in a few weeks, and at worst non-existent. Okay, this I think is changing in many places, but not very much. Now, what Kuruma knows is not acknowledged as knowledge. Her extensive familiarity with the world around her, her hands-on experience with all processes around her, her ability to make things grow, to shape things, and to connect to nature are considered irrelevant in the school. In school, she learns that whatever science might be, it's not something she's at home with. School typically teaches her to see technology as given, not constructed. And, NEP, when it, draft NEP 2019 talks about fun in science, fun activities in science. Whose fun are they talking about? I really do not understand at all. And, these are children who work very hard, physically hard in their lives. Now, let's not be, it's very important when I say these things, we should not be romantic about Kuruamma's traditional knowledge either. Kuruamma does need modern science. The secret that book holds, I mean, she can make things grow, but she doesn't know nitrogen fixation, right? I mean, there are many, many things, and she needs to travel beyond experiential learning. She needs even more the language of science that insists on quantification. And that's something that's completely alien to Kuruamma. Now, when she cannot speak this language, entry into the world of science is denied her. As in other forms, language is a powerful means of social exclusion, perpetuating inequity. I mean, there's a topic that we can take up entirely and discuss, the role of language in perpetuating inequity in the math classroom, in the science classroom. There is a need for a movement. Public understanding of science is not something that can be taken for granted. Science education should reflect the process of science. Science has a critical role to play in democratic processes and in governance. And we need a movement to place science on the public agenda. And that need is as real now as it was in the 1980s when the People's Science Movement started. Now, let me mention a little bit about Tamil Nadu Science Forum in this, because that is the group that I have been associated with. And yeah, there are very important comments by Kishore and Dr. Jayaraman in the chat. I call it a voluntary disorganization because it's certainly voluntary and certainly disorganized. My Science Forum friends here would also approve. It was started in 1980 by a group of graduate students of the University of Madras. And the first event was a popular lecture on quantum mechanics. So you can imagine what they thought was popular science. In fact, my involvement started with a popular talk on Gödel's theorem. There were 6 persons sitting there, and I was stunned. I mean, one person was from the railways, one from LIC, one from a publisher, all kinds of people. I was wondering, why do these guys come on a Sunday morning to listen to a talk on Gödel's theorem? And they had started a magazine in 1987, and this was in 1989. And Tulir was already mentioned. It's a monthly children's science magazine in Tamil. Well, I'm sorry, I should have amended that. When I said by now, it was about 2 years ago. After the pandemic, of course, things have changed completely. Tulir doesn't have any circulation now. It has all been going on WhatsApp, on PDF file on WhatsApp. But we don't have any circulation at all now. And it's read by children and adults, mostly in rural areas. And the sales agents are teachers. And, we have magazine clubs called Tulirillams, where, something like one Tulirillam may have 2 or 3 Tulirs shared by 10 children or 15 children or 20 children. And whatever you write in Tulir becomes the means of communication out there. There are several publications that I can mention. One is Jantar Mantar, which is at a secondary school level. There is Siragu, which is on discussions on science policy. There is one called Arivuttendral for neoliterates. There is a Virudu, which is a bi-monthly for elementary school teachers. And we keep publishing books in science. I mean, so it's very much in the old way. I mean, this is not, this is very much physical stuff taking to people. And there are, a few things that I'll mention we can discuss if anybody is interested. One is we have these science festivals where children, 100 to 200 children in a festive atmosphere, 2-day to 5-day events, and where children perform experiments. One of the important principles is that everybody does things hands-on. That's the only thing, right? Whether it's origami or science experiments or math games, everybody, work with clay, work with things, but do things hands-on. There are metric melas, nature walks. And then there are these low-cost, no-cost experiments. These are all, a large number of workshops, emphasis on group activities, group games. Anyway, let me not go on with this. This is something that I want to mention. Been working a lot on integrated modules, and this is very important because our school curricula are so compartmentalized, and there is a need for reintegration. By integrated science modules, I'm talking about modules like science in the kitchen, where you just talk science. I mean, in the kitchen, there is physics and chemistry and chemical engineering and mechanical engineering. There is everything, math, you can talk society, everything is there. I mean, you ask who does the cooking and why, how much lighting does the kitchen have, and how much waking time is spent in the kitchen, and how much area does it have relative to the rest of the house, and so on. We have, something on paper, something on light. On light, you can do physics, you can do art, you can talk about photography. Bicycle is another favorite of mine. So many of these. And then it was mentioned Children's Science Congress. This is something that we were associated. In fact, I think Tamil Nadu Science Forum can take great credit in starting it off originally, and then it was taken over and it's done at a national level. And then there is this Teachers Network. I already mentioned briefly. And somebody mentioned this slideshows. Yeah, well, yeah, in street corners, we had this Dialogues and Science series. Science for the Public lecture series. So, I mean, and then a lot of work on use of folk media, using street theater, and literally in street corners, Brechtian style. There are very many plays like blood donation, cholera. Well, there are many things. I just wanted to mention, if somebody is interested, I can go into details. And as I said, now there are about a large number of groups of neoliterate women. These are self-help groups in Tamil Nadu, who are microcredit groups, but they are used as an occasion. I already mentioned that Arivathendral, which is a broadsheet. And there is many exercises. Here is something that I wanted to mention. This is some math on the street. Yeah, this is my favorite one, where Leonid showers in Lingampetti, where we were sitting there, hours of waiting, and one little child asked, "Are there people in other stars also waiting for these showers?" Now, 2001. At that time, we basically were answering saying that, "Oh, we don't know. We think we are alone in the universe." And very quickly, we learned that there are many exoplanets. There is, thousands by now that people talk about. So we are also learning as we go along, and there's a lot. Well, recently, March for Science in the last few years. This is something that again, science movement has been involved in. The Breakthrough Science Society has taken the lead, and one very interesting thing in this March for Science going on the streets is now we are able to see that many others, want to get in and talk about it also. And there is some encouragement from the general public for this as well. Now, let's not forget the specific concerns relevant to the Indian context. Science is an important weapon in the battle against forces of obscurantism and superstition. Science education as an essential component of modernization and social transformation. Now, this is very important against the aggressiveness of nationalist sentiment in recent times. There is a systematic attempt at rejection of Western science and to discover Indian roots in science. The debate should not be traditional versus modern, but scientific versus unscientific, evidence-based. That's what we should be talking about. And there is a confusion the need for a non-Eurocentric history of science with glorification of an imagined past. Now, and this is something that science education, I think, should engage with. The culture of public debate needs to be informed by the scientific temper. Now, one of the most urgent needs for us is conservation of our environment. Now, this is something that, my involvement in science movement, if I take, 90s, much of the time we were spending our time on talking about how environment education was very important in science education. Now, over the last 20, 30 years, it's become, in fact, in primary school, it's called environment studies. But then something else has happened. There is a whole new breed of romantic environmentalism that is not rooted in science. In fact, mostly this leads to anti-science attitudes. I consider this one of the grave dangers of modern India. understanding the needs of development and environment together means grappling with complexity, resisting quick and unscientific solutions. And this is a serious danger confronting us. So let me conclude with saying, well, the pandemic has shown how science and public decision-making remain alienated from each other in our society. The gravest issues before humanity are perhaps poverty alleviation, climate change, and public health. We need to ensure that our society commits to science and seeks solutions to its problems in a scientific manner. And this means a democratically rooted confidence in science and technology. What worries me is a whole new generation which lacks faith in science and technology as a means for solving social problems. And this runs very deep. And this is something that science education must engage with in a very serious manner. Now, only when critique, experiment, and dialogue are central in the public arena can science act as a tool for social transformation. When our entire politics, when people are afraid to speak out, when people are afraid to criticize, and when there is no atmosphere for dialogue, and then I do not see how science would thrive as a tool for social transformation. This cannot happen without transforming the science classroom. Silent classrooms breed into this, feed into this. It is the classroom that has to become an arena for discussion, for debating, for critiquing, for a critical attitude. So the role of science education, I mean, I hear so much about various kinds of inquiry-based science, all that, but ultimately it has to become an arena for debate, for criticism, for critiquing, for talking science, for discussing science. And I think, breaking that silence is perhaps I would say, the central question of science education. Kuruamma, tomorrow's scientist. Can she make a good scientist? She can make a good scientist one day. Will she? Chances are she will not, unless we take social equity in science education seriously indeed. I think far, far more seriously than we have in the last 5 decades. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ramanujam, for a very inspiring and very talk which had a lot to think about. And I'm sure there are lots of questions. I think some of them have already started coming up in the chat. So if people would like to just unmute and ask your questions, that would be great. Otherwise, you can type them in the chat box and one of us will point them out to Jam.
So can I go?
Yes, please.
So is there a repository of materials of TNSF that we can use or publicly access? I'm especially interested in the songs and the plays.
Yeah, well, it's all in Tamil and we have publications. So, and that has been the mode all along. So I can direct you to the publications, yes. I mean, there is nothing online. I mean, it's a, well, 21st century, but there is not, not much into that. So, there is a remark by Padma on chat, and does she want to talk?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Ask you? Well, I was just interested because, like KSSC and in Madhya Pradesh also, Eklavya, they've been able to influence science education itself at some level. It's a struggle, but they have been able to do something. What about Tamil Nadu? I mean, your forum, has it been able to influence curricular content? Curriculum itself is very difficult, but at least curricular content, has it been able to do? And the second part of the question is this: there are so many science forums in most of the states have them, not most, many of them do. Why don't we all come together and do something about it so that, it has much more impact nationally?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, in the 80s and 90s, there was a great deal of, I think this did happen, I must say, in terms of a lot of sharing. There was a lot at the national level. I hope my friends in the All India People Science Network Committee are not listening and saying when I said it did happen and not now. But the truth is that there's much less of it now. And things have changed. I mean, in the 21st century, the science movement, in general, I think the progressive movements, there is a certain demoralization that has happened in society in various ways. It has affected the science movement as well. Now, there are in different pockets, in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, in Haryana, in Himachal Pradesh, there are groups which have been very active. The Hindi belt, that's a big problem, compared to what it was earlier and what it is now. And the other thing is that, in the remark by Padma, you were putting Homi Bhabha Science Center and Eklavya and Tamil Nadu Science Forum in one list. Those are institutions. Science Forum is not an institution. It's a voluntary body. There is no funding. There is no institution. There is no so it's, volunteers come and go, and there are a few. I mean, like, I've been an old donkey. We've been kicking around for a long time, but young people come, take over, do things. So, and things are very different, and should the science movement institutionalize in the same sense? I don't even know whether it can and do. KSSP has been one, and but even there, KSSP is very, very different in structure and quality from Eklavya or these. So these are very different. And when it comes to involvement in curricula, well, with the state government, it has always been a love-hate relationship, and in the sense that there are times when we work with the government, but this is a slogan shouting crowd. So, there are always times when you are, kicked out, kept out very, very carefully. And then, but then government is not a monolith. Secretaries change, ministers change, governments change, then you are invited, and then until the next moment you start shouting slogans, you are out. All these things happen. It's a process of negotiation. And curriculum is always a contested space. Remember that. I mean, there's nothing easy in the, any curriculum that a committee designs is always going to be problematic, in my opinion, right? It's not that, people who are ultimately wise and deep are going to design curriculum that's going to stay there forever. It's a social construction. Curriculum is a social construction. And I think it should be something that's engaged with. And okay, that's a short answer, but that's a much longer thing to say. Yeah, and in terms of
I just wanted to say something, that I wasn't intending it to be a criticism of the of the Tamil Nadu Science Forum at all. It's just that I have been part of the movement too, and it's very frustrating because all of us, all these groups, we all act in our own spaces, and yet we do not come together. And these institutes we're talking about were actually part of the movement at one time. Absolutely. And because they weren't able to do much, they became institutions, raised their own funds. So, there is a time, especially today, when for us to actually again start the process of coming together. That's all. I mean, I didn't mean to criticize anything.
No. I hope I didn't sound.
Part of the movement, so that's right.
I didn't sound in a. I was not trying to be defensive either.
No, not at all. I just wanted to make certain that I.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Jam, can I ask you about
please, yes.
Contrast Kuroma with, let's say, a Naina Jha in an expensive Delhi school, rich parents. Okay, now it is obvious that Kuroma has no chance in getting admitted to IIT or IISER, and Naina Jha has. But let's imagine that they are both given a scholarship, to go to a good liberal arts college in US. What are the chances that Naina Jha or Kuroma will become great scientists? I would say Kuroma has a greater chance than Naina Jha, because Naina Jha has been destroyed by the education that she's given, whereas Kuroma still has a chance. Her mind is not destroyed. So let me give you some questions that Kuroma will be able to answer, will be interested in. You asked, what is the boiling point of water, and said, how do I know? Now, suppose you also have questions like, is air a mixture or element? And both will say, oh, air is a mixture. And you say, how do I know? And because the ancients say that air is an element, how do you argue that it's a mixture? Kuroma will be interested, Nina will not be interested. Mina's doors are closed. If I ask something like, is it possible for a triangle to have, is it possible for straight angle triangles to exist? Can you prove it? Can you prove both, that they can exist and they don't exist? Nina has no chance because she will not be interested. Her mind is dead. Suppose I ask, are butterflies birds? Because birds have wings. And Nina would say, obviously not, that's a stupid thing. And Kuroma will be interested. And finally, if I ask something like, is democracy possible without anarchy? Kuroma will be interested in the question, and Nina's doors are closed. And I would say that this poor Nina Jha is actually underprivileged. She has no chance, her mind has been destroyed. Kuroma is still a free person. How would you respond to?
Well, yeah, I mean, the possibilities as far as Kuroma is concerned that you mentioned, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with. I'm not that sure with Nina Jha, but you know, I would be kinder there, because I think there is still, you know, a lot more that is possible there. And I mean, if whatever involvement I have had with, you know, or in science forum that we have had, I must say, in rural science education, you are absolutely right in terms of the kind of engagement that is possible and the kind of interest that you are talking about. And especially the last question that you said, oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, democracy and science, discussions of this kind, not only, you know, and let me add this, it's not only the Kuruvamas, it's also the science teachers, right? The teachers also. I mean, I have been engaging with school teachers for a very long time. And I think, you know, in rural areas, you know, there is a lot of possibility. But I think in Mo, in your articulation, one problem that I have is the power of language as a means of social exclusion, you know, and the power of language as, I mean, you are the linguist, why am I telling, right? I mean, the power of language to get you entry into things, into all. Now there, Nina Jha has an advantage that is astronomically higher than what, you know, and Kuruma's battles. I mean, that's why I said that's a separate discussion in its own right. I mean, I would put language as a central problem in math and science education, you know, in the rural areas in the country as a central thing. And by language, I'm not talking about, you know, okay, I mean, it's a deeper issue, but that very conversation that you were talking about, right? Between you and Nina, you ask and she says, and so on, that shared language that you are assuming is a huge problem, is a, you know, terrible problem in our schools. I think we are very long way in that.
I agree that Kuroma has various kinds of disadvantages, including language. So there is also, for example, Nina Jha has an opportunity to pay huge amounts of fee and get into MIT or Stanford, whereas, you know, Kuroma doesn't have that chance. So there are disadvantages. I'm simply pointing to another kind of disadvantage, which is intellectual death brought about by our education.
I completely agree with you. Yeah.
We had some more questions also coming up. So one was from Kritika. Kritika, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Okay, she asks if you could elaborate on the I think absence of scientific temper among environmentalists that you were speaking about.
Ah, oh, okay, yeah, okay. So when I was talking about romantic environmentalism, right? What I mean, again, it's a very brief answer, but you know, a big part of environment as it is seen in science education in our school. And it's, you know, it's almost like don't cut trees, save trees. Of course you should. You should preserve biodiversity and everything is fine. That's it. I mean, it doesn't look at it as in any way related to the central problem of development. You know, for instance, you know, when you pose, you know, cases and discuss in many places, you see that when you talk about forests, you know, people are made the villains. You know, the people living in the forest are made the villains, and you know, they have livelihood. So, how do you, in general, look at environment and development? Are there conflicts? How are the conflicts to be resolved? This is a complex issue. By simplifying it, oversimplifying it, very often it becomes against development. You know, something like returning to some imagined utopian closeness to nature. It becomes language of that kind and not dealing with, you know, social problems that need to be actually solved. During the pandemic, we have seen that. You know, when people really talk about, you know, a whole lot of people who are saying, you know, this is because we have destroyed nature and we have to get back to nature. As a, you know, nature is getting back at us with this pandemic because we are all sorts of stuff. But the short answer is this, that environmentalism, when you oversimplify, especially when you do not see what the consumerist capitalist society and its structure and, you know, what it is doing to the environment, it's a real problem. So that's what I was talking about.
May I ask, Professor? Ma'am, am I allowed to ask, ma'am?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, ma'am. My name is Rajan. I am from Banaras Hindu University. I am a philosophy scholar, ma'am. So I would like to ask to the professor, you know, philosophy is often called as the queen of sciences. And, you know, we worked a lot to the progress of philosophy, and we have seen that. But all of a sudden, science made a huge progress. There is no doubt about that. But, you know, in the late or the early 20th century, we saw some analytical thinker came and they adopted the scientific approach, even in doing the philosophy. So when they tried to adopt the linguistic approach or the analytic approach, they tried to refute the whole history of philosophy. They said it is basically useless. Take for an instance of Wittgenstein. So how would Professor give the response to that? Like, is there any kind of conflict between science and philosophy, or was their claim of particularly of analytical thinker that philosophy is useless, just like that Stephen Hawking says that philosophy is dead? So I want to say that when philosophy gave so much to the world, how science came and become so much egoistic about their approaches? This is the thing I want to ask.
Yeah, I mean, when any such sweeping statements are of course problematic. And I'm a logician. I mean, I earn my salary proving, you know, theorems in logic, and that's about as close to philosophy as it gets. And I'm very much interested in analytical philosophy. I do not see that, you know, I do not see analytical philosophy and science as posited against each other. And I think that's a tremendous oversimplification that does violence to our intellectual engagement with science. So that's certainly not well.
Kishore, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Naina, and thanks, Jam, for this nice presentation. And it's a pleasure listening to you as always. There's one thing you also mentioned in the slide about the kind of science education, the process-based science education, and its connection with this. The term that you used is superstitions. The question I have is slightly on a different dimension. Is that if you look at, let's say, the recent history of science for past 40, 50, 60 years, many of the proposals that came from science into quotes later proven to be quite disastrous. For instance, something like the Green Revolution, and we all went by the science, we all went by the research that science told us about, and now we are almost like a full cycle, and we are talking about salinity of our lands and the way the land is becoming infertile, and There is a lot of discussion about going back to, again, being native, so-called native to the whole thing. So science gives you something. There is no doubt that science corrects itself and says that something was wrong. But in the meanwhile, there is some destruction that is being caused. It's also because it is getting governed by all these profit agendas. So if you would comment something on this, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, Kishore, of course, I agree with you. I mean, in fact, part of the reason why in the title I put whose science, right? I mean, it's a matter of who owns the science, right? And who, and when we, even when I talk about science communication as, people say, taking science to the masses. I mean, as if the masses are out there and science is something that is there and you take. So it's a matter of people's ownership of science. I mean, that is part of the, so, within the science movement, there have been like extensive discussions on this for a very, very long time. And I remember one of the publications from the 80s where, or maybe early 90s, I don't remember, on, this walking on three legs as it is called. So, and, what do we mean by this, right? I mean, I'm sorry, I mean, I also, when I use the word like superstition and so on, it's of course loaded and problematic, right? But, let me just say one example of something that we were doing. In Tamil Nadu, there is a, Manohar is there in the audience and he knows the history much more than me. And, when there is one belief, it's a traditional belief in many parts of Tamil Nadu, and that when a baby is born, right, as soon as an infant is born, the first, mother's milk, that's thrown away. The colostrum. The colostrum is considered poisonous for a child and it's actually thrown away. Now, there is a plenty of understanding in science to show that the colostrum actually is very important to build the immune system of the baby. So here is something where you need to intervene. So we had quite a campaign going around, talking to women, in many, many villages, saying that, the colostrum is important and that. Now, this is the sort of thing that I'm talking about. There are many, of course, in belief systems, all sorts of things happen, but in, what does harm, right? And how do we engage with that, with the public and actually go and do. Blood donation, that I remember that play that we did, using street theater, that's because a large number of people believe that if you give blood, you will become weaker, right? And, and it makes a lot of sense for poor people to say, as it is, it's all screwed up and I'm having such a difficult life and you tell me to give blood, I mean, come on. And so to talk about regeneration of blood is very important. So, and that's tied up with all kinds of beliefs. So, so I understand it is a nuanced thing. And but ultimately, when we say science for the people, science for development, science for the nation, you talking about finally the ownership of science by the people. And there, I think you and I are in complete agreement.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jam.
Yeah.
Hi, Jan. There are quite a few students here. I just was wondering if any of them would want to ask any
please,
questions. So yeah, I mean, so I see.
There are some on chat.
I could ask a question.
Yeah, please, Ishita, go ahead.
Professor, thank you for the talk. That was really interesting to hear.
I think we lost you, Ishita.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes,
yeah,
you are.
Yeah. I just wanted to know what your opinion would be on how we could solve the problem of the language problem and the problem with language and access. Because on one hand, there is the absolute need to get people information in their own languages so that they can learn concepts and apply it in their day-to-day lives. But there is also the fact that learning English provides you with a whole lot of opportunities that you won't have if you're only trained in vernacular languages. So yeah, just what do you think about that?
Yeah. So, well, the problem is that, I mean, in my opinion, it goes a little deeper than that. First is, of course, talking science in whatever language you speak in, right? I mean, that is the most important thing, because once science you think and talk in a particular way. That's what, as I said, gives entry into, you have to talk mathematics, you have to talk science. Now, there are several layers of language here. It's not only about mother tongue and English or whatever other language that you can think of. Because, if I take, I typically usually read out passages from school textbooks, and which mother ever talks in the tongue, right? No, I don't know in Hindi or in Tamil, there's no hope of, I can read something from a math textbook. No mother ever talks in that tongue. Okay, this is not mother tongue, right? So it's not a matter of just putting it in Tamil, right? Because remember, there is something like academic discourse, right? When you enter the university, what you learn is academic discourse. In mathematics, I usually like to say that anybody who uses without laws of generality, without thinking, is a mathematician, right? Because it is a certain way of thinking that is reflected in your speech, right? So there are layers here. What the mother speaks, what you speak at home, the home language is very different from academic language. And you need to transcend that barrier, right? So even if it is in Tamil or Telugu, it doesn't matter, right? Kuruma needs to go from home language to academic language of the school in general. And then there is disciplinary language. Science has the language. And then there is this language of quantification, right? So there are many, many layers to ascend. And she is, completely at a disadvantage in this. And of course, there is caste. In our society, everything is ridden by caste. So, and the shadow that caste, casts on language and language practices, right? In Tamil, I open my mouth and speak 4 sentences, and then everybody will know which region I am from, which caste I belong to, which distinct. Okay, I've got a lot of training and I can try to obfuscate a bit, but there's not much you can do. In Indian languages are very rich in this, right? And that determines interaction, and that determines academic interaction as well. So those are all the issues that I'm talking about. So I'm afraid there are no easy answers. And I think those are things that we need to engage with very seriously. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, Rohit.
Sir, good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
Sir, my query is here. What are the basic problems of science talking in present day?
Well, present day, it's the pandemic.
That is pandemic. After pandemic or before pandemic, what are the basic problems in India?
Yeah, okay. Everybody has their prioritization. I put in as the fundamental ones, I would put in are climate change, poverty alleviation, and public health. These are the things that I would say, perhaps the biggest problems of the 21st century. And these are things that we must solve. And only thing in whatever I was saying in the last few minutes, that I do not see how that is going to happen without annihilation of caste, without us looking at the socio-economic models of development that we have, and bringing critical thinking into the public arena. So there, if you say, science, it's not just education. See, we have given up on expecting in public life. Do we even expect science to be used in decision making? In fact, we are surprised if it does. We have given up on that, right? It's not something that makes it to electoral politics. It is not part of manifestos. We do not expect that problems of society, when the flood happens, right? When Chennai has this huge flood, we do not expect it to be solved using scientific means, right? And we don't see Google Maps used to talk about flood levels and it's rushed. It doesn't happen. So we have given up on that, and that is the fundamental problem.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
We have a question from Advait and then one from Aishwarya.
Hello, am I audible?
Very faintly, Advait.
All right, is this better? Okay, thank you, ma'am, and thank you, sir, for that great talk. I think one of the things which has been in the news recently is Ramdev Baba and the coronal, the whole episode around that. And oftentimes it's of course been criticized for being unscientific and something which is drawing again from this revivalist past, saying that, Ayurveda can cure everything, etc., etc. However, I think even in my own family, my grandmother and even my mother, they're very open to that idea. They're very embracing of the idea that Ayurveda can actually solve a lot of things. And I think one of the reasons my Amamma would say that is that when she was growing up, that's all that she knew. And that's all that she thought of as medicine and science. But then suddenly she's being told that everything that she's grown up with is absolutely wrong. And we have like something completely different now. And I think that some people, most people, are not able to reconcile that, and they want to continue believing in what they were taught when they were young. And I think modern science as well has failed to bridge this gap between people who had different traditional beliefs, which might or might not be based in scientific temperament, but different traditional beliefs. They fail to bridge the gap and bring them into modern science discourse as well. And most of the stuff which I have found, which is critical of even something like Ayurveda, most of it has this tendency to downplay all traditional medicine. So I was thinking, what kind of effort is required to bring scientific temperament to communities who still believe in traditional medicine, and what can the modern science community do differently in order to reach out to these sections?
Thanks very much, Ashwath. And I think Advait, yeah, that's a, what you are asking is very, very fundamental. And there is a very short answer to what you are saying. Atmosphere of public debate. What public debate do we have? I mean, the problem that you are talking about is no different from the problem Kuruma was facing when I was talking about. Her knowledge of nature, her understanding of nature, and how that is inauthenticated in school. It's the same problem that you're talking about, right? How do we understand traditional knowledge? How do we understand it in relation to? So in fact, this is related to what Amrita Tripathi has written on chat as well. So let me take that along with that. And she says, isn't science dogmatic as compared to other disciplines which scientists refuse? Yeah, I mean, when we see science as authority, of course, and again in science movement, we have seen this again and again, science communicators come and say, oh, I am not saying this, science is saying it. Na sollala, அறிவியல் சொல்லுது, and so on. Then you are being as much a figure of authority. The problem is, remember, I am talking about talking in the classroom, talking science, right? When you have silence in the classroom, right? When you do not have modes of rational debate, right? When we are not used to rational debate, that is the example I was saying with Kavasara Kudinir as well. I mean, we do not talk about evidence-based reasoning at all. I mean, let's not mix Ramdev Baba here. I mean, there is, there it is not simply a matter of, traditional versus modern, etc. There is profit-making that is at issue out there, right? I mean, that gets mixed up. But when you do talk about this, positing science and traditional beliefs, the main problem, my problem, is that it's either acceptance or is it rejection. And I think we should move away from such binaries. We should move away. I mean, we should get into engagement, rational, evidence-based culture of debating. I don't know how much you have got on that. I never had any such thing. I never, I grew in a large family, right? Brothers, sisters, cousins, 13-member family. And there is laughter, there is tears, there is emotion, but I don't remember brother and sister sitting together and debating something rationally. I didn't grow up in that. And like I was telling you, in the school, I never learned scientific debating, scientific argument. Until I came to graduate school, I didn't realize that classroom was a place to debate things, to talk, to engage with, to criticize, to talk. Never learned that. So how is it suddenly going to happen in public life? So that's one of the reasons why I'm saying we have to start in the science classroom with engagement, with debate. And we must get used to that. We must get used to, and actually start quoting evidence. And that's painful. It's not easy to look for data. And data is messy. It's not going to be very nice and clean and simple. You have to learn to engage with that. That's what I hope is the answer to your question. And certainly, like what Amrita was talking about, science can be as authoritarian. And in Indian scientific establishment, of course, and you have to fight it, and you have to fight it as much as any other, and through only rational evidence-based analysis. Yeah.
Shwarya?
Yes, Aisha.
Good evening, Professor. Thank you so much for that talk. I just had one question, and it's a bit different from Pulwama's situation. I was thinking about a school where there is access to laboratories and weekly access to laboratories. And the general idea that we hear is that do not touch anything because you might either break it or you might, mess around with it and you'll have to get new stock. And I went to a school where teachers used to say, unless you've broken something in a laboratory, you haven't learned anything, so to speak. So I was wondering, where does this problem arise from? Does it have something to do with the funds that are available to schools for procuring the material, or does it have something to do with just the way science is taught?
Oh, what a wonderful question. I mean, I don't think there are any easy, I don't have any easy answers to this because, I mean, I'm doing this from home and my children are going to come at me and say, hey, did you let me break things, right? Of course, this is always an issue, right? And there is a part of you that wants to conserve, there is a part of you that wants to, and even it's not that easy to explore. It's not that easy to explore and find out things on your own, and, so pragmatics always stands in the way, you might say. But there is a fundamental problem of attitude. The problem of attitude of, how much value we give to exploration, how much value we give to engage with things that we don't know, right? Rather than taking what is known and learning what is known, as I also know it, to things that I don't know, and therefore when I engage with, it can be. Now, safety can be an issue. Safety is a very, very important issue. In fact, our safety standards are pathetic, and therefore we need to. But apart from that, to actually, have models of exploration, I'm very happy that you went to a school where they told you that unless you have broken something, it's wonderful. It's not how it happens in general. And that's why I said science in the kitchen, right? I mean, kitchen should be a place where you explore, for sure. We don't do that, right? In a safe fashion. And that's something we could do. And in much of what I was talking about, we were talking about science in everyday life, science at home, right? A huge part of school science can be done at home. And like I said, with low cost, no cost material. It's just that we don't use those opportunities. That's what I was highlighting. But ultimately, it's attitude change, and that's not easy. Thank you.
If there's anyone who hasn't yet asked a question and would like to, please go ahead. Otherwise, I think there are questions from other people who've already asked questions before.
I guess I could jump in. Thanks a lot, Jam, for a very engaging talk and discussion. I was just going back to the first example you gave about asking students what the boiling point of water is, and then bringing in more complications in terms of pressure or salinity or what have you.
No. I don't want to bring in any such. Sure. I'm saying usually people say, yeah. Okay.
Sure. So that just got me thinking. So when we're talking to people, not necessarily who are steeped already in the culture and language of science, but like, for example, laypersons or school children, do you think that our attempt to use reductionism actually alienates people because it takes away from the reality of the situation?
Wow. Yeah, that's possible, I suppose. I would say in general, it's a refusal to take complexity seriously. And that's a major problem. Like I said, environmentalism, again, I see that, I see this in many, but even the very example shows possibilities, right? Because, like I was talking about this boiling point of water, right? And we don't stop there. I mean, I put it in a slide to get people thinking, but, I've done projects with children, many projects. I mean, there are, you look at boiling point of sambar. I mean, sambar has a boiling point, no? And you can try to find it out. And you can try to then ask, there is imli in the sambar. If you increase the imli concentration, does the boiling point go up or go down? And then you don't stop there. You say, by how much can I, plot a graph Can I, write an equation, right? So I'm saying there are ways of engaging with complexity in what you're talking about. I'm more interested in that. I mean, I'm sure, as you know, there are no easy answers to what you're saying. But the point is that we must make it a habit to engage with complexity. You don't stop with the simplistic answer and then actually take it to life and say that, what about the boiling point of the almond milk that you drink every morning, right? And is the boiling point of cow's milk different from that of buffalo's milk? I'm saying the very process of asking these questions and actually engaging with them. And as I said, it's not simply, stopping there. And it's not, some theoretical construct that you ask and answer. You actually do something, right? I mean, the kind of messiness that is actual science. I feel that, I don't know if there's a satisfactory answer to your question. I understand that it's a deeper one, but my point is that at least if you start engaging with messiness, right? If you start working with wood and metal and soil and dirty or literally dirty your hands and doing things. I think, because when you start working with wood, you realize that there is error, there is fracture in the wood, and there is, there is a lot of defects, so to speak, and they play a role, right? So there somehow I feel that there is an intuitive understanding of complexity that can save you from, ultra reductionist perspective. I don't know if that's a good answer.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so floor is open. Whoever would like to ask questions, please just jump in and ask.
Can I ask?
Go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think in India we have enough funding for research? If somebody wants to pursue basic science and wants to get into research, do you think there is enough encouragement from the government to make a research a career?
Not at all. Not at all. I think it's very, very little. It's pathetically small, I would say. And I think we need much, much more. And
how do you think we can increase funding and
well, in general,
science?
I think, okay, March for Science is a movement that has been, focusing on this quite a bit. And, articulations about what percentage of GDP and, what is the actual real expenditure, what is it claimed in budgets and what actually reaches. And if you see the analysis, the actual funding for any kind of scientific research, forget fundamental or applied or whatever, is actually very, very small for a country of this size and for its economy. So, the point is that we are not prioritizing it seriously enough. Yeah, that's the short answer, but it's something that, the scientific community in general, society, the economists have to engage with much greater seriousness, I would say.
Arya, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, my question is, where do you see the role of popular science writing in, say, popularizing science itself? And do you see it as valuable at all? So is there when you say popular science writing, it could be some kind of fiction which uses science, not science fiction as such, but say stories which have people doing science, or say scientists writing memoirs, popular memoirs, things like this. Do you see this as valuable for popularizing science?
This was not a planted question. I didn't plan this, so let me make it clear to you. This is all I have been doing in my life. So, and so of course I think it's valuable and I think it's very important. And I think that's a breed that we don't have enough of. I've been pitching for every scientific institution to take science communication very, very seriously. And I think we need paid people doing these things, right? It's not just, out of the whatever goodwill that I write or something like that, right? Science communication is something that we do not take seriously in our society. We have lots of scientific institutions, and compared to the size and, that itself is not, as I said, funding in scientific research is not much, but we need all kinds of science communication. And well, more power to you with fiction. Yes, of course. And today there are new media available, various kinds of media, nothing is stopping us from actually doing it, but ourselves. And I think we need a lot more. So please, Arya,
Could I follow
join the
up on
breed.
that?
Yeah.
So sometimes when you have this kind of popular science writing, it tends to get rid of all the complexities like you were talking about earlier, and that might actually make it less accessible. Even though it's trying to make it simpler to make it accessible, it might actually completely divorce it from reality. That's one. And second, it might portray science as something completely different, or something like science fiction, for example. It obviously it is fictional, it is imagined, but it is a completely different reality from what actually exists. Do you see this kind of thing as warping how people approach science due to popular science writing?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's a fundamental problem. I think it's a problem journalism also faces in general, that in the process of taking things to people, you want people to be informed, you tend to dumb down, and the process you may miss complexity. I think, like I said a little bit earlier, engaging with the complexity very seriously, I think it's possible. That's why science communication is not simply, taking some scientific information and packaging it. That's why I said processes are much more. I tend to focus on processes. That's why I'm talking about boiling point of sambar and so on, right? Because how do you find out? What do you do? Like I said, the messiness that is involved in that teaches you a lot more science than, products of science. I mean, it's all easy to say. It's not that easy to actually do, especially in the written mode, which is what all I have been doing for a long time. It's much harder, but it's possible. But yeah, but it's something that we need to do. And it is not about dumbing down, that I'm very sure of. And yeah, about imagination, there, I mean, fantasy has a great role, especially with children. And so, imagination is very, very important. So alternative universes, whatever, that bombard the mind. And children have no problem at all, engaging with, and they don't worry about, after all, what is real world, right? I mean, in any case, what does science say about the real world? Not much, really. It's about models. So I think there are lots of possibilities, but that's another topic altogether. So,
thank you.
Just wanted to add on that quickly, that Mashweta Devi has a very lovely little book called The YY Girl.
The YY Girl, yeah.
Which
that's
is about a little tribal girl who keeps asking so many questions that the local postmaster calls her the YY Girl.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I have a question.
Amartya has a question, Prathamesh.
Yeah, thanks, Nana. Thank you for the talk. So one question I had regarding the sort of making science more, I suppose, more apparent in everyday lives is, I think, the sheer almost absence of science. So you were mentioning about how science should be about science in the kitchen, right? So
yeah.
I think at least what I perceive it as, perceive this problem, which I'm trying to describe, is that we don't see examples of science in everyday life as obvious, right? You have to try and go deeper into things to actually sort of realize that, oh, there's this thing going on behind it, because I've been taking this thing for granted for so long. So
right.
How exactly, so when one talks about making science something more apparent compared to, let's say, false assumptions which people have been going on through ages in the form of traditions or other such things, in various forms, such as some health practices or some other forms of traditions, how exactly do you counter them without making the everyday more complex? Because as I think in Advait's question also, that people are fundamentally opposed to change. So how do we bring about that shift in thinking from what is tried and tested and what one is comfortable with to trying to delve down deeper into the everyday to just discover the science behind everyday things? So maybe writing could be one form which we're just discussing about.
Yeah, I mean, well, again, not an easy question to answer, because it's true of all of us, right? In everything we do, that we are resistant to change. I mean, that's fundamental for all of us, right? I mean, we don't want to change in general, and to change it has to be like kicking and screaming and, something that has to really convince you that you need to change. So it's not easy. So it's not a matter of telling anybody that what you're, I mean, if somebody just comes and says what you're doing is wrong and therefore you must change, and, starts quoting all kinds of tables and graphs and says, this is the reason, why the hell would I listen, right? So it doesn't happen that way. And that's one of the reasons why in many of the things that I talk about, there is history, right? I'm talking about a movement. I'm not talking about some, particular factoid, some particular thing. Something you win trust over a long time. You win trust, with people for you work with people for a long time. You get engagement, you get trust, and then when you win trust, I mean, with children, right? It takes a while to establish that trust. But once, and of course, in fact, after that, you can say anything and people will take. That's also true. So, of course, there is but that process, it is that process that actually answers the question that you're talking about. And in that process, each side takes the other side seriously and realize that there are no two sides, there are multiple sides, and some conversation actually happens. And then change is possible. But these are slow processes, and we need to keep faith in those processes, and we need to sustain work.
Thank you so much for the answer. Yeah, I think that helps.
Thank you.
Mitra has a question.
I'm sorry, yeah, what is that?
No, go ahead, Jem. So there's someone else who has a question.
Yeah, before that, I just wanted to, Manohar had mentioned this in chat that I forgot to add. For many of us, a lot of this also came from engagement in adult education. And what I just told you is, adult education is very important. And as a society, we have given up on adult education. And I think adult education is one of the things where I got in much of my learning came through that. And because when there is a difference with children. When you are working with adults, when you are talking to them, there is a fund of experience. There is a fund of, people come with democratic participation. Remember, in an adult education class, people have the freedom to walk out anytime, which is not true of your school classroom or your university classroom. Teachers are used to, their students not having the freedom to walk out. Adult education teaches this, that your students can walk out anytime, and they will. So it's very important because the kind of contract that you engage in is very, very different. So it's not an accident that much of people science movement came through, adult literacy and I certainly did, work with people in adult education long before I started working with children. So I think that the respect for people and modes of thinking that people have, that adult education teaches you, I think is very important, which went into the makeup, but somehow didn't figure in my articulation.
Sumitra wanted to ask a question.
Hi, Jam, this is Sumitra.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. This has been a lovely conversation. I just had a question. Is the nature of evidence-based argumentation universal? I mean, I know this is a loaded question for a logician, I guess. But I mean, would you say, can you debate what constitutes evidence and what might be valid proof? Do you see this as something that is universal, or is there some kind of a systemic, side to it?
Yeah. Well, to that again, I would say there is no single answer. There are, in general, domains of validity is something that we do not engage with, and that's a problem, right? I mean, the problem is that we do not, in general, talk about domains of validity at all. And when we start bringing that into the conversation, bringing that into our language of debate, the debate gets much richer, right? And even means of validation. I mean, like I talk about Kuruma's knowledge, right? Where is that epistemology that is saying, certifying it as knowledge, right? How do you authenticate it? Who authenticates it? what are the power structures that go into authenticating it? Point is that we don't engage with these things at all. And I think that's in fact the problem. Certification, right, doesn't, doesn't actually have anything to do with domains of validity, domains of validity. And that's a problem. And so we have to move away from these binaries. That is, and in education, definitely. And in science, I understand that it's harder, but it's doable. I mean, it's really a matter of changing the terms of debate. And I think that's, and in fact, it's without those terms of debate, science becomes as authoritarian as any other structure. And that's a problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great to see Sumitra after.
Yes, lovely to see you too.
How
Yes.
many years? My God.
Very many, but lovely talk. Thank you. Lovely conversation, really.
Thank you.
Prathamesh has a question and then Prabha has a question.
Okay, hi Jam. Okay, so just two questions. So first one is in terms of the recent vaccination in I've kind of come across quite a few vaccination skeptics in like some of the rural areas around here, right? I mean, and so what have been the challenges that KNSF, for instance, is currently facing? And generally also for the just general question of, how does, let's say, someone from the benefit of the audience, how does someone want to engage with TNSF do so? Like if someone is interested in, so what would you suggest? I mean,
Oh, great. Yeah, this is also not planted. Prathamesh is asking. Yeah. Okay. So the
Jan, your mic is a bit far away.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I forgot to hold it up. Yeah. The first one about what is the biggest challenge that we are facing? The damn pandemic, lockdown. And, as I said, I mean, science movement, the only training we have is to actually go to people and talk to them. And that is not something that is possible right now. And another major problem for us is that school teachers have been our major mode of doing all the work. I mean, like I told you, Teachers Network is the strongest thing that we have got. And the state schools have been closed. And, so that's the biggest, our standard means of communication has really broken down. And like I said earlier, we are pathetic in the online world. I mean, so, compared to the scale of things that we could do in general, when we actually go and meet people to now, there is a huge difference. But with all that, with whatever, people are doing things on WhatsApp, whatever that reaches. And we have call-ins every day, and people calling from various places. And so networking people, I would say, is the biggest thing. And then, of course, we have this database of questions from people. We have actually collected questions from people on various aspects of the pandemic. I mean, that's, I've seen the compilation. It's very, very impressive. I mean, it runs into literally hundreds of actual questions from various people in various contexts, so categorizing them, that's what is going on. And using that, this is something that we've always believed in terms of using the articulation of people to answer in those terms. Like I said, right, that language is very important. So that is one of the major exercises being done right now. And, but we, there is a major communication breakdown. And the messaging is all, so extremely simplistic as it is coming. So bringing that conversation is very, very hard. But that's what is going on right now. And in terms of people wanting to learn more about Science Forum work, one thing I will do is to add, put in my email and on chat. People are welcome to write to me, and I can forward it to different people in science movement, depending on the kind of interest and the particular kind of work that people are interested in. So it's very easy to remember, and I think anyone who wants is welcome to contact me on more on the science movement.
We'll also share it with everyone who's left, because there may be other people
who
would like to get in touch.
Thank you.
I think Prabha, do you have more time, Jan?
Yeah, it's okay. I have no problem. I have no
I'm
problem.
sorry if I'm not very presentable, but my question is partly covered by Sumitra ma'am. Isn't experiential knowledge anything at all? See, I had a grandma who took care of me during both my pregnancies, and I had a traditional properly, I was taken care of properly for 40 days after both my children were born. And despite having had a cesarean, touch wood, I'm fully fit, but my grandmother herself had 8 children. Until she was 90, she was walking about, and she would say that it's how I was taken care of after my pregnancy is the secret of my health. You can't, you talked about colostrum, that's why. So my question to you is, isn't experiential knowledge anything, nothing at all? Is it only scientific evidence that is important? That's one question I had. Another question is, aren't there rural innovators everywhere around? There are so many inventions that they have made, and with which they have made life simpler for themselves. Thanks to social media, we get to know about them. But what value would you give to those? They aren't people who have had, proper education, so to speak. This was my questions.
Jam, can I also add to
yes,
Pravaji's question?
Yes, please.
So what would it take to strengthen, those epistemologies? Let us say evidence-based reasoning tomorrow is incompatible with the with Ayurveda as a knowledge system, because that was not the foundations on which it was conceptualized. So what can such systems borrow from science, or even if the absence of that, so what would it take to have another Charak or Sushruta in this age?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to answer that last bit, but let me, in the very first thing when I was talking about Kuruvamas, understanding of I mean, you remember I started with saying that, I think it was in my very first slide, Kuruvamas' knowledge of trees, birds, insects, processes all around her, making things grow. And I kept on saying, I don't know, I am the scientist, right? So it is to posit that I was talking about. So experiential knowledge is extremely important. And I'm, I thought part of my whole thing was to say that experiential knowledge, she walks into school and it's completely invalidated. In fact, it's, the first thing that she learns in school is that whatever experiential knowledge she has is not science. And I think that's wrong, right? So that's where I start with. So my problem is that do not pose it as Ayurveda versus modern science. There are no easy answers there. Look at what is happening to Kuroma in her every day in her classroom. Every day in her classroom, for lakhs and lakhs of children, what is happening to their experience and what they see in the textbook, and that encounter that is happening day in and day out through these. That is what I want to focus on. I'm not saying that the question that you are asking is uninteresting. Please understand that. It's a different problem. Somehow, without solving this, in my opinion, you're not going to solve those bigger questions in society. Because we are asking somehow, if we suppose tomorrow, right, Delhi has a high power committee. They are used to having committee of 12 persons and 15 persons with all these things. And they come out with a beautiful statement reconciling Ayurveda and modern science. How is that? What is it going to do to my Kuroma? It's going to do nothing, right? So I don't want to take the debate there. I'm very clear about it. It is not simply a matter of, whatever those traditional practices that Ms. Prabha Manjunath was talking about, as, who is authenticating and how, right? So it's not simply a matter of some committees authenticating and answering, and therefore we all accept, right? That certain processes of clinical trials that we talk about, that must go on. And in my opinion, the answers are not to be found there. I'm bringing it back to, if in your science classroom, you do not, have a means of talking about my personal experience with what my textbook is telling, right? If I do not ask the question, hey, you say in the book, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. I did the experiment and I get 100.2. What the hell do you mean? If your student is not asking you this question, it's much more problematic to me than worrying about, whatever thing to do with the medicine that we are talking about, right? Because some things can be solved by committees. This is not going to be solved by committees. And experiential knowledge has to find a place, but experiential knowledge has to be engaged with in terms of our everyday experience and our understanding of what constitutes knowledge, right? That the epistemology authoritatively working in school to silence the mind of the student. And when I say this, and I mean this in all schools, and I include undergraduate classrooms in Kriya and graduate students in Tata Institute or whatever. Any epistemology that does not give room for discussing experience and what constitutes knowledge and engaging with this is problematic. I hope I'm making some sense here.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have one question from Nidhi, and maybe we can end on that because I think everyone's experiencing hunger pangs.
Yes.
Nidhi, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. I just typed it. I thought we are short on time, so I just typed my question.
Oh, wow.
And I won't be able to turn on my video because of the bad network.
That's fine.
So my question is that can we use the same material and methods for research in apparently different kind of, I'm a doctor, hence this question, for apparently different kind of medicine modalities. Like Ayurveda, we talk of the body in terms of chakras and nadis and all that. And in modern medicine, we see the human body in terms of organs, tissues, organ systems, and so on and so forth. So can the same material and methods be applied to Ayurveda while assessing its efficacy and collecting evidence as we do in modern medicine?
Well, I'm not competent to answer this. I mean, I know almost nothing about either system. I mean, I know a little bit of mathematics and a little bit of logic can do, but I mean, I can only answer these in a very general understanding of science, which is what I was talking about and all these things, is that if you use the word can, I would say yes, but why not, right? In principle, of course, can evidence for Ayurveda be gathered by materials and methods of modern science? Yes, and equally the other way. Can evidence for materials and methods of modern science be gathered by methods of Ayurveda? Yes, because I do not see any logical, there's no theorem there that says you cannot, right? So I do not see. So that it's not so much to do with theoretical possibilities here. It is to do with actual engagement and doing things and demonstrating and and having an atmosphere of debate where we can actually have a reasoned debate on these, which I think is lacking in the country. That's all I can say. But as I said, I don't have any greater competence to talk on this issue at all.
Okay, and
there was a second question, yeah.
And the quick second question was that how do we decide that in a resource-strained country, what things should be researched about? Like there was this thing about cow urine and cow dung research. So of course we know that cow dung we use as compost and manure and all those things. But in a resource-strained country, how do we prioritize funding in research? And who does that?
Well, I'm very thankful that I'm not the S&T minister or Secretary of Department of Science and Technology. But seriously, I think that whole thing was a complete distraction. I mean, the problem is that we do not have sufficiently many qualified people doing good science, labs, engaging with various things and funding for that. And we have so little of that. And then that whole cow urine science or exams on that, and this is a complete distraction. I think it's a colossal waste of time and energy. And of course, it's done for precisely that deliberate reason. I mean, the money is also not much, by the way. That is not the issue there. It is one of changing the terms of public debate. That is what is going on there, and that is how I would like to react to that. But in terms of the country and its resources, I think that's I think there will be economists coming here. We can discuss this in this forum in depth. Is there money for science in the country? I believe there is. I think there is. There is plenty. It's just that, we are not thinking of it in the right terms.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Thank you so much.
So I think we'll close on that. Thanks so much, Jan, for this wonderful session and for not only taking the questions, but also the spirit in which you take these questions. And to everyone else who's here, we also have actually one of the future speakers who's still in the audience. This is a series, Narendra Nayak.
Oh, okay.
So this is going to be a weekly series, which will start at Monday, 6:30 every week. And if you'd like to attend, it's the same Zoom link for all the sessions. So you can use the link that you used to attend today. And please feel free to pass the word around. And we will have a bigger room next time. This time, unfortunately, people who wanted to get in didn't manage to. So yeah, see many of you maybe next week. And thank you so much again, Jam.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was lovely.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jan, for coming. Yeah.
Thanks, Jan.
Bye.